Recovered data fragments from sealed administratum archive vaults on Terra describe a pattern of death that, at first examination, appeared statistically impossible. Planetary governors expired in secured chambers without signs of forced entry. Rebel commanders fell mid-speech while surrounded by loyal bodyguards. Heretical demagogues were discovered lifeless behind armoured transparasteel, the only mark upon them a single surgically precise wound. Pit capture from distant surveillance arrays occasionally recorded nothing more than a momentary distortion, a fractional displacement of light, followed by terminal collapse of the subject. No assailant was visible. No conventional weapon discharge was detected. Investigators catalogued these incidents separately for centuries before cross-referencing revealed identical ballistic signatures, identical timing irregularities, and identical absence of trace evidence. Collated analysis eventually identified the cause not as coincidence, nor technological anomaly, but as the deliberate work of a highly specialized arm of the Officio Assassinorum, known as the Vindicare Assassins. The origins of this temple are rooted in the political aftermath of the Horus heresy, when the Imperium confronted the realization that open warfare alone could not ensure stability across 1,000,000 worlds. The High Lords of Terror required instruments capable of removing singular threats without triggering mass unrest, planetary rebellion, or costly campaigns. Conventional military deployments were often too blunt. Even the Adeptus Astartes, for all their precision in war, represented a visible escalation. What was needed was the capacity to excise individuals with absolute certainty while leaving surrounding structures intact. From this strategic necessity emerged the doctrinal foundations of the Vindicare Temple. Early doctrinal manuscripts describe a philosophy centered not on aggression but on inevitability. The Vindicare approach to warfare treated conflict as a mathematical system in which the removal of a critical variable could collapse an entire hostile equation. Rather than break armies, they would unmake leadership. Rather than destroy infrastructure, they would deny coordination. This required not merely skilled marksmen, but individuals capable of operating in total isolation, exercising patience measured in days, weeks, or longer, and maintaining unwavering focus on a single designated objective. Recruitment into the temple followed processes as severe as those of any imperial institution. Candidates were drawn primarily from the scholar progenium, though additional sources included orphaned populations exposed to extreme environmental hardship or individuals identified through rare psychological screening programs. Potential initiates were selected not for physical strength, but for neurological disposition. Records emphasize unusual traits such as reduced autonomic stress responses, heightened pattern recognition, and an ability to maintain conscious stillness for extended durations. These characteristics were interpreted as indicators of the mental architecture required for long-range execution under absolute silence. Training regimens erased prior identity. Names were removed from all documentation. Recruits were reduced to numerical designations and subjected to conditioning that fused discipline with sensory calibration. Instruction included advanced ballistics theory, atmospheric analysis, target behavior prediction, and the physiological study of sentient anatomy across numerous species recognized by the Imperium. Assassination, within Vindicare doctrine, was not improvisational violence, but the final stage of prolonged observation and calculation. Environmental endurance formed another major component of their development. Initiates were required to remain motionless in hostile climates, including arid wastelands, frozen plains, and chemically tainted industrial zones. Failure to maintain concealment resulted in termination from the program, either through reassignment to lesser duties or, in some recorded cases, through fatal consequence during training itself. Survival established proof of suitability. Success demonstrated not only resilience but the capacity to subordinate biological impulse to mission priority. The Temple's methodology evolved alongside Imperial technological advancement, yet it retained a consistent conceptual model. Each assassin was intended to function as a solitary deployment asset, capable of infiltration without support infrastructure. Unlike operatives of other temples who relied upon disguise, speed, or close combat, Vindicare agents embodied distance. Separation from the target was itself a defensive mechanism, ensuring that the assassin remained beyond detection even during the act of execution. Documentation from the late 38th millennium details refinements to psychological conditioning protocols. These adjustments addressed the cognitive strain associated with extended surveillance assignments. Some operations required an assassin to observe a target environment continuously for several standard months, awaiting the singular moment when probability aligned with mission success parameters. Rather than permitting distraction or emotional drift, the temple introduced meditative focus techniques coupled with hypno-doctrinal reinforcement. These ensured that the operative's perception of time became secondary to task completion. Operational philosophy also emphasized independence from local Imperial command structures. Vindicare deployments were typically authorized through the highest administrative channels, bypassing planetary authorities entirely. This separation prevented political interference and ensured secrecy. In many documented cases, local officials remained unaware that an execution had been sanctioned until after the target's death. Such compartmentalization reduced the possibility of information leakage, which could compromise both the assassin and the broader objectives of the Officio Assassinorum. The historical record indicates that Vindicare actions frequently preceded major shifts in regional stability. Rebellions lost cohesion following the elimination of charismatic leaders. Traitorous elements within the Adeptus itself were neutralized before their influence could metastasize. Xenos collaborators, rogue psychers, and secessionist nobles all appear within archived target lists. Yet the temple maintained strict operational restraint. Deployment was reserved for individuals whose continued existence represented measurable strategic risk rather than ideological opposition alone. Analysis of temple records suggests that the Vindicare were never intended to inspire fear through spectacle. Their success depended upon ambiguity. When a target died without visible cause, observers often attributed the event to internal betrayal, divine judgment, or simple misfortune. This ambiguity destabilized adversaries more effectively than overt displays of force. The unknown assassin became a conceptual threat rather than a visible enemy, fostering distrust within hostile hierarchies. Throughout the Imperium's long history, technological stagnation and rediscovery affected nearly every military branch. Yet Vindicare equipment standards remained comparatively consistent. This continuity derived from the temple's reliance on precision-engineered relics whose maintenance was entrusted to specialized mechanicus sects. Rather than adopting untested innovations, the temple favored incremental refinement of proven systems, ensuring reliability across centuries of use. Stability was valued above novelty. The culture within the Vindicare Temple reflected its operational isolation. Unlike other Imperial organizations that fostered collective identity through heraldry or ritual congregation, Vindicare operatives trained and functioned in near solitude. Interaction between assassins was minimal and typically limited to instruction or evaluation phases. This deliberate separation prevented the formation of interpersonal attachments that might compromise mission detachment. Each operative existed as a singular instrument calibrated for a specific purpose. Archival testimonies from supervising officials describe successful Vindicare agents as exhibiting an almost mechanical composure. Emotional expression was not entirely absent, but it was tightly regulated. The assassin understood loyalty not as sentiment but as structural alignment with Imperial survival. Their role was neither celebrated nor publicly acknowledged. Even within the Officio Assassinorum, Vindicare operatives represented a specialized subset whose achievements were recorded in classified ledgers rather than commemorative histories. Strategically, the temple's existence allowed the Imperium to wage a form of warfare defined by subtraction rather than conquest. Entire campaigns were avoided through the timely removal of a single adversary. Resource expenditure decreased. Civilian infrastructure remained intact. Political fallout could be managed or redirected. This efficiency ensured continued High Lord support despite the moral ambiguity inherent in assassination as a state function. By the dawn of the 41st millennium, the Vindicare Temple had become synonymous with absolute lethality delivered through patience, calculation, and distance. Their operations left minimal forensic trace, their agents remained nameless, and their influence extended far beyond the single shot that defined each mission. They were not soldiers in the conventional sense, nor spies, nor executioners acting in passion. They were analysts of mortality, applying mathematics, biology, and discipline to the removal of designated lives in service to Imperial continuity. Within the immense and often unwieldy machinery of the Imperium of Man, where wars consumed worlds and bureaucracy spanned star systems, the Vindicare represented an opposing principle. Where the Imperium was vast, they were singular. Where Imperial warfare was loud, they were silent. Where armies required supply chains and command hierarchies, they required only position, patience, and authorization. Their presence ensured that even the most powerful individual could be reached, observed, and ultimately judged expendable. This foundational structure, established in the shadow of civil war and refined across 10,000 years of application, defined the operational identity of the Vindicare Temple as it would persist into the modern era of Imperial history. Following the establishment of the Vindicare Temple as a precision instrument of Imperial policy, its continued effectiveness relied upon the creation of operatives whose physical capabilities, perceptual acuity, and technological integration exceeded conventional human limits while remaining within the boundaries of sanctioned augmentation. Unlike the transhuman transformation undergone by the Adeptus Astartes, Vindicare Assassins remained fundamentally human in physiology. Their enhancements were directed towards sensory refinement, neuromuscular control, and metabolic regulation rather than mass or brute force. The objective was not durability in open combat, but the elimination of variables that could disrupt a perfectly calculated shot. Vindicare operatives typically exhibit lean physiques with minimal body fat, and adaptation encouraged through controlled nutrition and biochemical conditioning. Excess mass was considered detrimental to stillness and endurance. Height and weight varied according to genetic origin, but all assassins were conditioned to maintain a center of gravity optimized for stability during extended firing positions. Muscle fibers were trained for sustained isometric tension, allowing an operative to remain motionless for durations that would induce collapse in an unaugmented individual. Dermal pigmentation was often altered through environmental acclimatization and selective therapy, enabling the assassin's skin tone to adapt subtly to operational theaters. This was not cosmetic modification, but a functional response to concealment requirements. Scarring, where present, was typically the result of implantation procedures rather than battlefield injury. Each scar represented integration of a device intended to increase precision, perception, or survivability in isolation. Ocular enhancement formed one of the most critical aspects of Vindicare specialization. Assassins underwent surgical modification to support advanced visual processing, including the ability to calculate distance, atmospheric refraction, and target motion in real time. These biological improvements functioned in tandem with external targeting systems, creating redundancy that ensured continued lethality even if equipment degradation occurred. The assassin's own nervous system served as a secondary computation engine, allowing engagement under conditions that would blind or disorient conventional marksmen. Respiratory discipline was equally significant. Through hypnoconditioning and biofeedback implants, Vindicare operatives learned to regulate breath cycles to the point of near suspension. This control minimized body movement at the moment of firing and allowed the assassin to remain concealed in environments with limited oxygen availability. Some recorded deployments required remaining within sealed positions for several days without meaningful movement, sustained by slow metabolic cycling induced through training. The most recognizable element of Vindicare equipment is the Exitus rifle, a weapon engineered specifically for the Temple and maintained as a sacred instrument by designated Mechanicus artisans. Unlike mass-produced Imperial firearms, each Exitus rifle is individually calibrated to its assigned assassin. The weapon's construction incorporates rare alloys, precision-machined barrels, and integrated sensor arrays capable of interfacing directly with the operative's targeting augmetics. This integration ensures that ballistic data flows seamlessly between weapon and wielder. The rifle is designed for modular ammunition deployment rather than standardized rounds. Vindicare doctrine recognizes that no single projectile type is sufficient for all assassination parameters. To address this, specialized ammunition variants are issued according to mission analysis. These include shield-penetrating rounds capable of breaching personal energy defenses, mass-reactive rounds calibrated to detonate within biological tissue, and exit rounds designed to fragment after impact to prevent forensic reconstruction. The selection of ammunition is treated as a strategic decision rather than a logistical detail. Sound suppression within the Exitus system does not rely solely upon mechanical baffling. Instead, the rifle employs a combination of subsonic discharge, recoil dampening, and advanced propellant chemistry to minimize acoustic signature. In many documented cases, witnesses failed to recognize that a shot had been fired at all. This absence of identifiable sound reinforced the perception of unexplained death, aligning with the Temple's doctrine of psychological disruption. Complementing the rifle is the Exitus pistol, a secondary weapon intended for contingency scenarios in which proximity engagement becomes unavoidable. Though rarely employed, the pistol retains the same design philosophy of precision and adaptability. Its presence acknowledges the unpredictability of real-world operations while maintaining adherence to Vindicare principles of efficiency and finality. The Vindicare bodysuit represents a fusion of stealth technology and life support engineering. Constructed from sin-skin material, the suit adheres closely to the operative's form, eliminating loose surfaces that might produce noise or visual irregularities. The fabric incorporates adaptive coloration systems capable of blending with surrounding environments, though this capability is subtle rather than theatrical. The suit's primary function is to break up recognizable outlines at long distances, rendering the assassin indistinguishable from terrain when observed through magnification. Embedded within the bodysuit are microfilament sensors that monitor physiological status, toxin exposure, and environmental hazards. These systems allow the assassin to operate without external support, providing real-time data regarding hydration levels, muscular strain, and atmospheric composition. The suit also contains waste recycling mechanisms, an unglamorous but necessary feature for missions involving prolonged immobility. Headgear used by Vindicare operatives integrates auto-senses, range-finding arrays, and target tracking overlays. Unlike the elaborate helmets of many Imperial forces, this apparatus is intentionally compact to avoid silhouette distortion. Visual feeds are processed directly into the assassin's enhanced perception, enabling simultaneous awareness of wind velocity, thermal variance, and structural interference between weapon and objective. Maintenance of Vindicare equipment requires collaboration with select adepts of the Adeptus Mechanicus, who are cleared for restricted knowledge access. These individuals do not design new weapons for the Temple, but instead preserve and recalibrate existing systems according to ritualized engineering procedures. The relationship between Temple and Mechanicus is defined by mutual dependency. The assassins require flawless functionality, while the Mechanicus regard the Exitus platform as a technological relic worthy of meticulous preservation. Distinctive behavioral traits further differentiate Vindicare operatives from other Imperial agents. Communication is sparse and utilitarian, restricted to mission parameters or technical clarification. Many assassins demonstrate limited engagement with broader Imperial culture, not from disdain but from the intensity of their specialization. Their worldview is shaped by observation and calculation rather than participation. Time perception among Vindicare operatives often diverges from standard human experience. Extended surveillance assignments condition the mind to interpret hours and days as units of analytical progression rather than personal duration. This altered perception allows the assassin to maintain focus without succumbing to restlessness, a psychological adaptation reinforced through decades of training. Operational deployment patterns reinforce solitude. Vindicare Assassins are rarely inserted alongside other Officio Assassinorum temples. Each temple embodies a distinct methodology, and the Vindicare approach functions most effectively without interference. When coordination does occur, it is typically sequential rather than simultaneous, with the Vindicare eliminating a critical figure before other forces initiate broader action. Despite their formidable capabilities, Vindicare Assassins are not intended to dominate battlefields or engage in sustained combat. Their effectiveness lies in avoiding such scenarios entirely. Every element of their equipment and conditioning is designed to ensure that confrontation remains unnecessary. Success is defined by the absence of resistance, the completion of the shot before awareness arises. Through this convergence of physiological conditioning, technological integration, and doctrinal restraint, the Vindicare Temple has maintained a consistent operational identity across millennia. Its assassins are not merely skilled shooters, but carefully engineered instruments whose traits, tools, and behavior align toward a single outcome: the precise removal of designated individuals in a manner that leaves minimal trace, minimal disruption, and maximum strategic consequence. The psychological profile of a Vindicare assassin is the product of deliberate erasure and reconstruction rather than natural development. From the earliest stages of training, individuality is reduced to functional identity. Personal history is neither celebrated nor preserved. Memories of origin are treated as irrelevant data that may introduce hesitation or bias. What replaces them is a disciplined cognitive framework oriented entirely around observation, calculation, and execution. The assassin does not perceive themselves as a warrior seeking victory, but as a corrective measure applied to a flawed system. Emotional expression is not entirely removed, but it is tightly constrained through conditioning that emphasizes clarity over reaction. Vindicare operatives are trained to interpret emotional impulses as environmental noise. Fear, anger, pride, and even satisfaction are recognized only insofar as they might degrade precision. This emotional neutrality allows the assassin to study a target for extended periods without forming psychological narratives about guilt, innocence, or justification. The mission order itself is treated as the only required validation. This mental architecture produces individuals who often appear detached when observed by external Imperial authorities. Reports from administratum liaisons describe Vindicare operatives as calm to the point of abstraction, responding to queries with concise factual statements devoid of commentary. Such behavior is not hostility or arrogance, but the natural result of a mind trained to remove extraneous processing. Conversation, ceremony, and recognition are distractions from operational readiness. Vindicare assassins also display an unusual relationship with time and patience. Many Imperial servants measure accomplishment through visible action, but Vindicare doctrine defines success through restraint. An assassin may spend weeks analyzing a target's routine, identifying patterns of movement, environmental variables, and potential interference. During this phase, no shot is taken. The absence of action is itself considered active progress, as each moment of observation reduces uncertainty. This capacity for prolonged stillness is not only physical but psychological, reflecting a worldview in which outcomes are determined by inevitability rather than urgency. Loyalty within the Vindicare Temple is directed not toward individuals, commanders, or even fellow assassins, but toward the structural continuity of the Imperium. This distinction is significant. Because Vindicare operatives function independently, they rarely develop bonds comparable to those found within military units. Their allegiance is institutional and abstract, anchored to the authority of the High Lords of Terror and the mandate of the Officio Assassinorum. Orders are executed not out of devotion to a superior, but because the hierarchical system that issued them is accepted as necessary for human survival. Organizationally, the Vindicare Temple occupies a precise niche within the Officio Assassinorum's broader framework. Where other temples emphasize infiltration, psychological terror, or overwhelming close-range lethality, the Vindicare exists to deliver singular, decisive interventions. This specialization ensures that the temple is deployed sparingly, often only after exhaustive analysis confirms that alternative measures would prove inefficient or excessively destructive. The Vindicare is therefore less visible in historical narratives than other Imperial forces, yet its influence is often disproportionate to the scale of its involvement. Coordination between the Vindicare Temple and external Imperial bodies is intentionally limited. Mission authorization typically originates at the highest administrative level, bypassing regional command structures. This isolation protects operational secrecy while preventing political manipulation of assassination resources. Even within the Adeptus Terra, knowledge of Vindicare deployment is compartmentalized, with only essential personnel granted awareness of objectives or timelines. Interactions with the Adeptus Mechanicus are similarly controlled. Selected Mechanicus adepts maintain the technological infrastructure required for Vindicare equipment, but they do so under strict doctrinal limitations that prevent unauthorized modification. This arrangement reflects mutual respect tempered by caution. The Mechanicus recognizes the sanctity of the Exitus weapon systems, while the Vindicare Temple acknowledges the necessity of precise maintenance, without allowing technological curiosity to compromise reliability. Within the temple itself, hierarchy is functional rather than ceremonial. Senior instructors and overseers guide training and evaluate readiness, but they do not cultivate charismatic leadership. Advancement is determined through demonstrated consistency rather than battlefield distinction. An assassin who completes missions without deviation from protocol is valued more highly than one who exhibits initiative that risks unpredictability. The culture rewards exactness, not improvisation. Operational records indicate that Vindicare Assassins rarely require supervision once deployed. Each operative is entrusted with full responsibility for mission execution, including target verification, environmental adaptation, and extraction if required. This autonomy is a defining organizational trait. The Temple invests heavily in preparation so that control during the mission itself becomes unnecessary. The assassin functions as a self-contained extension of Imperial authority. Operational records indicate that Vindicare Assassins rarely require supervision once deployed. Each operative is entrusted with full responsibility for mission execution, including target verification, environmental adaptation, and extraction if required. This autonomy is a defining organizational trait. The Temple invests heavily in preparation so that control during the mission itself becomes unnecessary. The assassin functions as a self-contained extension of Imperial authority. The broader Imperium often remains unaware of Vindicare involvement, even when directly benefiting from it. Political crises may resolve abruptly with the unexplained death of a destabilizing figure. Military campaigns may never occur because their architects are removed beforehand. In such instances, the Vindicare Temple's success is measured by the absence of events that might otherwise have unfolded. Their influence is therefore recorded indirectly, visible only through the stabilization that follows intervention. From an analytical perspective, the Vindicare Temple represents a counterbalance to the Imperium's reliance on overwhelming force. The Imperium is frequently characterized by scale, deploying massive armies and expending vast resources to secure compliance. The Vindicare offers an alternative methodology based on precision and minimal expenditure. By eliminating key individuals rather than confronting entire populations, the Temple reduces collateral damage, logistical strain, and the potential for prolonged conflict. This approach also carries inherent risks. The effectiveness of a Vindicare operation depends entirely on accuracy of intelligence and clarity of authorization. A single misidentified target could produce consequences far beyond the loss of one life. For this reason, the bureaucratic process preceding deployment is exhaustive, involving layered verification designed to ensure that assassination is both justified and strategically sound. The Temple's restraint is therefore not merely philosophical but procedural. Over 10 millennia of Imperial history, the Vindicare have maintained remarkable continuity in doctrine and practice. While other institutions have fragmented, reformed, or diverged under political pressure, the Vindicare Temple has remained narrowly focused on its founding purpose. This stability reflects the timeless nature of its function. the need to remove singular threats without destabilizing wider systems has persisted regardless of technological regression or cultural change. In evaluating the Vindicare Assassins as an institution, it becomes clear that they are less an expression of aggression than of calculation. They embody the Imperium's recognition that survival sometimes depends not on conquest, but on selective intervention applied with absolute certainty. Their methods are quiet, their presence concealed, and their achievements rarely acknowledged publicly. Yet within the immense machinery of Imperial governance, they serve as one of its most exact instruments. The Vindicare Temple endures as a specialized mechanism designed to enforce strategic correction through precision rather than spectacle. Its assassins operate beyond recognition, guided by conditioning that replaces personal identity with analytical purpose, aligned organizationally with the highest authorities of the Imperium and sustained by technologies maintained across generations. In a civilization defined by vast wars and visible power, they remain the unseen calculation that alters outcomes with a single deliberate act. Surviving cross-departmental memoranda attributed to the Adeptus Administratum present the Vindicare Temple not as a martial organization, but as an instrument of statistical correction within the Imperium's governance model. Administratum analysts rarely categorize Vindicare actions alongside conventional military deployments. Instead, they record such operations within actuarial frameworks used to model population stability, resource preservation, and compliance probability across contested systems. Within these documents, assassination is treated as a controlled administrative intervention intended to prevent larger disruptions that would otherwise require extensive mobilization of Astra Militarum forces. Logistical studies conducted during the late 39th millennium compared the cost of suppressing planetary insurrection through open warfare against the removal of insurrection leadership through Officio Assassinorum sanction. The findings indicated that a single Vindicare deployment, when properly targeted, reduced projected material expenditure by orders of magnitude. Entire regiments, transport flotillas, and years of reconstruction labour could be rendered unnecessary if the destabilising figure was removed before rebellion achieved structural cohesion. Administratum clerks therefore began to classify Vindicare missions as preventative expenditures rather than reactive ones. This analytical framing led to the development of predictive threat indexing, a bureaucratic mechanism intended to identify individuals whose continued existence posed disproportionate systemic risk. These indexes relied on tithe irregularities, communication intercepts, trade disruptions, and doctrinal deviations flagged by ecclesiarchy observers. When multiple indicators aligned, administratum authorities could submit sealed recommendations for Officio Assassinorum review. It is important to note that such recommendations did not constitute authorization. They functioned as logistical evidence sets, supporting the argument that removal of a specific actor would preserve greater imperial efficiency. The Adeptus Mechanicus approached the Vindicare Temple from a different perspective, one grounded in technological continuity and precision engineering. Mechanicus archives describe the Exitus weapon platform as a highly refined convergence of standard template construct principles and centuries of incremental sanctification. To the Mechanicus, the Vindicare arsenal represents a lineage of calibrated function rather than innovation. Tech priests assigned to maintain temple equipment do not consider themselves designers, but custodians preserving a near-optimal configuration, discovered through long empirical validation. Maintenance logs emphasize the ritualized nature of calibration. Each rifle component is examined through multi-spectrum or specs arrays, then adjusted using microtolerances measured in fractions of a micron. The Mechanicus interpretation of these procedures blends engineering with liturgical observance, reflecting their belief that perfect function is an expression of machine spirit harmony. Vindicare operatives, while not adherents to Mechanicus theology, accept these practices because they ensure consistency. Reliability is valued above doctrinal difference. Joint logistical reviews conducted between administratum logisticians and Mechanicus engineers reveal that Vindicare operations impose minimal supply burdens, compared to other Imperial assets. An assassin requires no large transport convoy, no ammunition stockpiles beyond mission-specific allotment, and no sustained communication infrastructure. Deployment typically involves discreet insertion via naval courier or covert lander, after which the operative functions independently. From a resource accounting standpoint, the Vindicare represents one of the least demanding yet most strategically influential branches of Imperial capability. Some Administratum analysts have described Vindicare missions as acts of structural subtraction, a term used to denote removal of disruptive variables without altering surrounding administrative frameworks. Where military conquest often necessitates reorganization of planetary governance, a successful Vindicare action allows existing bureaucratic systems to continue functioning with minimal interruption. Tithe collection resumes, trade routes stabilize, and census projections remain intact. This continuity is highly valued within Administratum doctrine, which prioritizes predictability across the Imperium's vast territories. Mechanicus commentary further notes that Vindicare equipment longevity exceeds that of many mass-produced Imperial arms due to its limited but meticulous use. Weapons are rarely fired outside of mission parameters, resulting in reduced mechanical fatigue. When components do require replacement, they are fabricated individually rather than drawn from standardized production lines. This bespoke maintenance model ensures performance stability over centuries, though it also necessitates restricted knowledge transmission among carefully selected tech priests. There exists, however, a degree of unease within both institutions regarding the opacity surrounding Vindicare operations. Administratum officials often receive confirmation of mission completion without access to procedural details, complicating long-term data modeling. Mechanicus personnel similarly maintain equipment without full knowledge of its operational history. This compartmentalization, mandated by Officio Assassinorum authority, creates gaps in otherwise exhaustive Imperial record-keeping. Analysts must therefore extrapolate outcomes based on secondary indicators such as sudden shifts in political stability or cessation of previously escalating conflicts. Several logistical treatises speculate that the Vindicare Temple's true value cannot be fully quantified through conventional metrics. While material savings and reduced casualties can be calculated, the psychological impact upon hostile leadership structures remains less measurable. Administratum scholars have suggested that the mere possibility of unseen elimination introduces behavioral caution among Imperial subjects and adversaries alike, indirectly reinforcing compliance. These conclusions remain theoretical, as the Temple neither confirms nor denies operational presence. Mechanicus reflections occasionally interpret Vindicare methodology as an embodiment of technological minimalism, the application of maximum precision through minimal force. In a culture often associated with grand engines of war and monumental constructs, the Vindicare arsenal demonstrates that refined calibration may achieve results unattainable by scale alone. This perspective has led some engineers to cite Vindicare systems as instructional examples within advanced ballistic studies, though always under restricted clearance. Across surviving documentation, both Adeptus Administratum and Adeptus Mechanicus records portray the Vindicare Temple less as an aggressive arm of Imperial will and more as a corrective mechanism embedded within its administrative and technological architecture. Their operations intersect with logistics, economics, and engineering as much as with warfare. Through this lens, the Vindicare Assassin is not merely an executioner, but a point of convergence where data analysis, mechanical precision, and bureaucratic necessity align to produce a singular, irreversible outcome. Administratum war ledgers rarely record Vindicare involvement in the same manner as they document the movements of regiments or fleets. Instead, their presence is inferred through temporal correlation between the elimination of key figures and the rapid de-escalation of conflicts that had previously demonstrated sustained growth. These correlations appear across multiple centuries, often identified only when later analysts compared casualty projections with outcomes that proved unexpectedly limited in scope. One frequently cited case within restricted archives concerns the destabilization of a rebellious noble coalition during the early years of the 41st millennium. Several planetary governors within a subsector had begun coordinated resistance against Imperial tithe enforcement, leveraging private militaries and void-capable assets. Initial projections estimated a suppression campaign requiring multiple Astra Militarum deployments and naval interdiction lasting several standard years. Records show that, over the course of less than a single solar week, 3 principal organisers died under circumstances officially attributed to sudden medical failure and accidental trauma. With their leadership structure removed, subordinate commanders failed to maintain cohesion, and the rebellion fragmented into localised disputes that were resolved through conventional arbitration rather than war. No Officio Assassinorum involvement was publicly acknowledged, yet administratum margin notes classify the outcome as consistent with Vindicare operational signatures. Another documented instance appears in Mechanicus Explorator correspondence, describing a conflict over control of a forged satellite, whose output was considered vital to maintaining armoured vehicle production in the region. A separatist Magos had fortified the installation and repurposed its defensive systems against loyalist reclamation attempts. Direct assault risked catastrophic damage to the manufacturum infrastructure, rendering victory strategically hollow. During a prolonged standoff, surveillance logs recorded a momentary systems interruption within the command spire. The separatist leader was discovered deceased shortly afterward, with no evidence of infiltration. Subsequent negotiations restored control of the facility without structural damage. Mechanicus analysts later remarked upon the improbability of the death occurring at such a decisive moment, though official records remained silent regarding its cause. Some accounts relate to conflicts involving non-human adversaries, though such references remain sparse and often speculative. Certain administratum battlefield summaries describe the abrupt collapse of hostile coordination among Xenos forces following the unexplained loss of synaptic or command organisms. In these cases, Imperial tacticians observed that enemy units reverted to disorganized patterns shortly before Imperial counteroffensives succeeded. While Vindicare deployment against alien targets is neither confirmed nor denied in accessible documentation, analysts have noted that the Temple's precision would theoretically allow engagement of biologically critical nodes within hostile hierarchies. There are also cases in which Vindicare intervention is believed to have prevented wars from occurring entirely. Diplomatic archives contain records of negotiations that stalled repeatedly due to the obstruction of a single influential figure whose rhetoric encouraged secession or doctrinal divergence. When that figure died unexpectedly, often under tightly secured conditions, negotiations resumed with markedly reduced hostility. Administratum historians reviewing these events have sometimes referred to them as examples of pre-conflict neutralization, though they stop short of attributing responsibility conclusively. During the later decades of the 41st millennium, several Imperial Guard campaign journals mention receiving orders that appeared to anticipate enemy disarray before any engagement had begun. In at least 2 instances, commanders reported that fortified enemy positions were abandoned or surrendered shortly after the unexplained death of their strategic coordinators. These outcomes reduced projected casualty figures significantly, yet accompanying documentation offered no explanation beyond classified authorization codes linked to the Officio Assassinorum. It is believed by some scholars within the administratum that Vindicare operations function most often at the threshold between war and peace, rather than within open battle. Their role is not to influence tactical engagements once armies are committed, but to shape whether those engagements occur at all. By removing individuals whose decisions would otherwise escalate conflict, they alter the trajectory of events before momentum becomes irreversible. This interpretation aligns with statistical analyses showing disproportionate reductions in large-scale warfare within regions shortly after unidentified targeted deaths. Mechanicus battlefield observers have occasionally noted the distinctive ballistic phenomena associated with Vindicare weaponry, though such observations are rarely preserved in publicly accessible data. In one redacted account, an engineer attached to a siege reclamation force reported detecting a projectile impact that demonstrated penetration characteristics beyond those achievable by standard sniper systems. The report was archived under restricted classification, and subsequent references to the event were removed from general circulation. Such fragments contribute to the broader belief that Vindicare actions are intentionally obscured even when witnessed indirectly. Despite these scattered references, the majority of Vindicare-related conflict resolution leaves no explicit trace within Imperial war chronicles. Their successes are embedded within absences, wars that diminished before reaching projected scale, rebellions that dissolved without decisive battle, and campaigns rendered unnecessary by the loss of singular actors. This absence complicates historical reconstruction, forcing later analysts to rely on circumstantial convergence rather than definitive attribution. In reviewing these records collectively, Administratum and Mechanicus scholars have concluded that Vindicare participation in wars is best understood not through battlefield presence, but through strategic preemption. Their engagements occur at distances measured not only in physical range, but in temporal displacement from the wars they prevent. Where other forces secure victory through confrontation, the Vindicare appear within the margins of history, shaping outcomes before those confrontations can fully manifest. Post-action analyses preserved within Administratum archive strata tend to examine Vindicare-related incidents not through narratives of combat, but through the measurable aftermath visible in supply chains, population stability, and tithe continuity. Where large-scale warfare leaves unmistakable signatures in requisition records and reconstruction budgets, Vindicare interventions are identified by the absence of those signatures. Entire subsectors that had entered statistical trajectories toward prolonged unrest instead returned to expected productivity curves within a single fiscal cycle. Administratum logisticians regarded these recoveries as evidence that the removal of destabilizing individuals could realign systems more efficiently than any military occupation. Comparative data drawn from several centuries of conflict projection models demonstrated that planets spared extended war retained significantly higher manufacturum output and required fewer cycles of infrastructural rehabilitation. Grain tithe shipments resumed on schedule, shipping lanes avoided rerouting, and civilian population displacement remained minimal. From a purely administrative standpoint, such outcomes represented the ideal resolution to sedition or heresy. Stability was restored without introducing the cascading bureaucratic complications that accompany planetary-scale campaigns. Mechanicus evaluations focused less on economic recovery and more on the technological implications of Vindicare deployment. Enginseer commentaries frequently noted that conflicts resolved through precise elimination, preserved machinery, archives, and sacred fabrication systems that would otherwise have been destroyed or degraded during open warfare. Forge installations in particular benefited from this restraint. Even localized combat could introduce contaminants or structural damage capable of halting production for decades. By contrast, Vindicare-mediated resolutions left these environments operational, allowing the Omnissiah's works to continue uninterrupted. Some Mechanicus treatises go further, suggesting that the Vindicare Temple represents a form of applied efficiency aligned with their own doctrinal reverence for optimization. The elimination of a single biological component to safeguard an entire industrial ecosystem is interpreted as an example of systemic calibration. Although the Mechanicus does not claim authorship of Vindicare doctrine, there is clear recognition that both institutions pursue outcomes defined by functional preservation rather than theatrical destruction. Administratum historians, tasked with compiling long-range Imperial chronicles, occasionally struggle with how to categorize events shaped by Vindicare activity. Traditional historiography relies upon visible battles, declarations, and campaigns. Vindicare actions rarely produce such markers. Instead, they create discontinuities in expected patterns. A rebellion predicted to escalate simply fails to do so. A charismatic war leader disappears, followed by immediate fragmentation of command. The historian must either attribute these moments to chance or acknowledge the unseen mechanisms authorized by the High Lords of Terror. There is also evidence of debate within administratum scholastic circles regarding the ethical abstraction created by this method of conflict resolution. Some analysts question whether the invisibility of Vindicare operations distances Imperial governance from accountability, transforming assassination into a routine administrative correction. Others counter that the alternative would be wars costing millions of lives and immeasurable material loss. These debates remain confined to theoretical discourse, as policy itself has never deviated from sanctioned utilization of the temple. Mechanicus records reveal parallel concerns of a different nature. Because Vindicare weapon systems are maintained through highly restricted knowledge channels, their continued function depends upon unbroken transmission of specialized expertise. Several internal memoranda warn that loss of these custodial lineages could render the temple's equipment impossible to replicate or repair. This vulnerability has led to the establishment of redundant maintenance enclaves, each sworn to secrecy yet capable of preserving the technological lineage independently should others fail. In examining the aftermath of Vindicare influence conflicts, both institutions consistently note a phenomenon described as administrative silence. Following the removal of a designated target, communication traffic associated with dissent or rebellion drops sharply. Orders cease. Propaganda transmissions halt. Financial irregularities correct themselves. The silence is not merely the absence of noise, but the restoration of predictable Imperial function. Administratum analysts interpret this as confirmation that many conflicts are sustained less by ideology than by the will of singular organizers. It is believed by some within the Mechanicus that this pattern mirrors mechanical fault correction, wherein the removal of a defective component allows an entire engine to resume intended operation. Such analogies, while not universally accepted, illustrate how the temple's actions are often understood through technological rather than martial frameworks. Across 10,000 years of fragmented documentation, the combined perspective of the Adeptus Administratum and the Adeptus Mechanicus portrays the Vindicare Temple as an instrument of conservation. Where other branches of the Imperium expend resources to conquer or punish, the Vindicare is employed to preserve existing order with minimal expenditure. Their interventions rarely generate monuments, battle honours, or public recognition. Instead, they are reflected in intact cities, functioning manufactorums, and ledgers that return to equilibrium sooner than projections would otherwise allow. The final analytical consensus emerging from these records does not celebrate the Vindicare in heroic terms, nor condemn them as aberrant. Rather, it situates them as a necessary adaptation within an empire whose scale makes conventional responses increasingly inefficient. The temple embodies a convergence of bureaucratic calculation and technological precision applied to the management of existential risk. From the administratum viewpoint, the Vindicare Assassin is a corrective entry written into the margins of history, ensuring that larger entries never need to be recorded. From the Mechanicus viewpoint, the Assassin is analogous to a finely machined instrument, applied sparingly but with absolute exactness to maintain systemic harmony. In either interpretation, their legacy is measured not by the wars they fought, but by the wars that concluded before they could truly begin. Inquisitorial archives approach the Vindicare Temple with a mixture of reliance and unease, reflecting the organization's unusual position within the Imperium structure. Unlike most Imperial institutions, which are subject to varying degrees of doctrinal scrutiny, the Officio Assassinorum operates under mandates that frequently supersede localized inquisitorial authority. As a result, many inquisitors encounter evidence of Vindicare activity indirectly, often after an event has already concluded. Reports compiled in Ordo data vaults therefore tend to emphasize observation and inference rather than direct documentation. Several sealed commentaries describe investigative teams arriving at politically volatile sites only to discover that the central figure under suspicion had died moments or hours before formal inquiry could begin. In these cases, death rarely aligned with known methods of execution or conventional attack. Autopsy records, where permitted, revealed trauma consistent with extreme velocity, projectiles delivered from distances that investigators could not easily reconstruct. The absence of witnesses, combined with the precision of the wound, led some inquisitorial savants to conclude that the elimination had been conducted by a Vindicare operative acting under separate authorization. Such conclusions were rarely confirmed. Requests for clarification submitted through official channels typically returned with minimal acknowledgement, citing operational compartmentalization. This lack of transparency has produced a body of inquisitorial literature characterized by cautious language. Analysts often employ phrases indicating probability rather than certainty, recognizing patterns without claiming direct knowledge. The Vindicare Temple is thus treated as both collaborator and unknown variable within broader investigations. Inquisitors concerned with heretical infiltration have noted that Vindicare interventions can abruptly terminate long-term surveillance efforts. A target cultivated for interrogation or public exposure may be removed without warning, eliminating opportunities to trace wider conspiracies. Some inquisitorial records express frustration at these outcomes, suggesting that while the assassin's action resolved an immediate threat, it also erased potential intelligence. Others counter that such removals prevented the suspect from activating contingency plans capable of far greater harm. This internal disagreement reflects differing philosophies regarding whether threats should be studied or excised. Field observations occasionally describe phenomena that investigators initially categorized as anomalous. Individuals under scrutiny have been observed occupying secured environments, surrounded by guards and layered defenses, only to be found dead without evidence of intrusion. Environmental scans sometimes detected a single point of material disruption consistent with a hyper-precise ballistic path, yet no firing position could be located within expected range. These findings led some Ordo Xenos and Ordo Hereticus analysts to question whether technological factors beyond standard Imperial capability were involved. Subsequent cross-referencing with restricted Officio Assassinorum data resolved these suspicions, though access to such confirmations remained extremely limited. It is believed by certain inquisitorial scholars that the psychological impact of Vindicare operations extends beyond their immediate targets. The knowledge, even when unspoken, that the Imperium possesses agents capable of reaching any individual regardless of protection introduces a form of deterrence difficult to quantify. This perception may discourage conspiratorial organization before it reaches detectable scale. However, because the Temple's activities are rarely acknowledged publicly, this deterrent effect operates largely through rumor and inference rather than declared authority. Unexplainable findings noted in some investigative logs include instances where Vindicare involvement appeared to anticipate threats not yet fully documented. Targets eliminated under Assassinorum sanction were later discovered to possess connections to heretical networks only uncovered through subsequent inquiry. To outside observers, the action seemed preemptive to the point of prescience. Whether this reflects superior intelligence gathering, undisclosed surveillance methods, or analytical processes unavailable to the Inquisition remains a matter of speculation within these texts. There are also references to rare occasions in which an Inquisitor and a Vindicare operative occupied the same operational theatre. Such interactions are described as minimal and strictly functional. The assassin neither offered explanation nor requested assistance, acknowledging only mission parameters deemed necessary for deconfliction. Once objectives were complete, the operative departed without formal report, leaving the Inquisition to interpret the aftermath independently. These encounters reinforced the perception that the Vindicare Temple functions parallel to, rather than within, the Inquisition's investigative hierarchy. From an evidentiary standpoint, the Vindicare leaves behind almost nothing beyond the effect of its action. No propaganda, no symbolic markers, and no attempt to shape interpretation. This absence complicates the Inquisition's reliance on traceable causality. Investigators accustomed to unraveling conspiracies through material evidence must instead contend with events defined by their lack of residue. Some archivists have described these cases as negative imprints within the historical record, identifiable only by the void they create. Despite such uncertainties, most inquisitorial authorities ultimately recognize the necessity of the Temple's function. The Imperium faces threats that cannot always be allowed to mature into prosecutable heresy or open rebellion. In those instances, the Vindicare represents a solution enacted before doctrinal processes can fully engage. The Inquisition may question the opacity of this mechanism, but it seldom disputes its effectiveness. Thus, within Inquisition archives, the Vindicare Assassin is recorded less as a known agent and more as an inferred presence. Observed through outcomes, deduced through precision, and rarely encountered directly, they remain one of the Imperium's most elusive instruments. Their actions intersect with inquisitorial work at critical moments, leaving behind conclusions without context and resolutions without visible cause, compelling investigators to accept that some measures of Imperial preservation operate beyond even their formidable authority. Within the deeper strata of inquisitorial record-keeping, there exist collections of sealed case files that catalogue irregularities believed to be associated with Vindicare operations. These documents are not confirmations of deployment, but analytical reconciliations produced when observable outcomes cannot be explained through conventional means. Many of these files were initially opened as investigations into potential warp interference, technological heresy, or Xenos involvement, only to be reclassified after patterns emerged consistent with extreme long-range execution. One frequently referenced anomaly involves a series of leadership deaths across neighbouring systems during the closing decades of the 41st millennium. Each individual had been under independent inquisitorial observation for suspected doctrinal deviation. Despite operating in different political and geographic environments, all were killed within narrowly separated time intervals. Autopsy data indicated projectile trauma of near-identical characteristics, yet no ballistic source could be recovered, and no infiltration had been detected. The synchronization suggested coordination beyond coincidence. Requests for clarification were redirected to sealed administratum channels, after which the case files were marked concluded without explanatory addendum. Another record details an encounter reported by an Ordo Hereticus retinue, assigned to monitor a cardinal whose sermons had begun to incite doctrinal schism. Surveillance teams maintained uninterrupted watch over the ecclesiastical complex, supported by Auspex sweeps and internal informants. During a scheduled address, the cardinal collapsed mid-proclamation. Medical examination identified a single catastrophic wound delivered from an angle that should have been physically inaccessible due to surrounding architecture. Structural surveys later discovered a minute penetration and line through multiple layers of material, aligned so precisely that investigators concluded the shot must have been calculated using environmental variables beyond standard predictive models. The case was subsequently transferred to restricted archives under the notation that further inquiry was unnecessary. Sealed Mechanicus adjutant reports occasionally appear appended to these inquisitorial records, describing forensic analyses conducted at the request of Ordo authorities. These analyses often confirm that the physical evidence demonstrates ballistic characteristics exceeding those achievable by mass-produced weaponry. Yet the Mechanicus contributors refrain from elaborating on possible origins, citing treaty obligations concerning certain technologies maintained under Officio Assassinorum jurisdiction. This mutual silence reinforces the perception that Vindicare capabilities exist in a compartmentalized sphere, shared only among the highest Imperial institutions. Some of the most debated anomalies concern situations in which a target's elimination occurred before the Inquisition had formally identified the individual as a threat. In such cases, later interrogations of associated networks revealed conspiracies already in advanced stages of development. These retroactive validations generated speculation among inquisitorial scholars regarding the intelligence-gathering methods employed by the Assassinorum. It is believed by some that the Temple receives predictive data streams or analytical projections unavailable to other branches of the Imperium. Others argue that such assumptions overstate the mystery, attributing the results instead to exceptionally rigorous surveillance and probabilistic assessment. No consensus exists, as access to corroborating material remains restricted. There are also rare references to physical evidence recovered from extreme-range engagements, including fragments of specialized ammunition retrieved during site examinations. These remnants are invariably transferred to secure vaults without detailed study, accompanied by directives limiting further analysis. Inquisitorial archivists note that even within sealed collections, such materials are catalogued with minimal description, as though their documentation were intentionally curtailed. The absence of technical annotation has itself become a subject of scrutiny, suggesting deliberate effort to prevent broader dissemination of knowledge regarding Vindicare methodologies. Documented encounters between Inquisitors and Vindicare operatives remain exceptionally uncommon, but several sealed testimonies describe fleeting interactions. In these accounts, the assassin appears only long enough to confirm operational boundaries, offering no identity or explanation. Their demeanor is described as entirely functional, lacking hostility yet resistant to dialogue beyond immediate necessity. Once their objective is completed, they withdraw without trace, leaving the inquisitorial team to reconcile outcomes independently. These encounters often conclude with formal acknowledgements that jurisdictional overlap has occurred under authority too elevated to contest. From an investigative standpoint, such experiences produce an unusual classification challenge. The Inquisition is accustomed to confronting threats directly, interrogating causes and tracing influence to its source. Vindicare actions interrupt this methodology by resolving the central danger before the investigative process can unfold. While this efficiency aligns with Imperial survival priorities, it also deprives Inquisitors of opportunities to map the broader architectures of heresy or sedition. Some sealed commentaries describe this tension as an operational paradox in which absolute precision both aids and obstructs the pursuit of knowledge. Across these anomalous cases, a consistent pattern emerges. Events attributed to Vindicare influence are defined less by what is observed than by what cannot be observed. No infiltration routes, no prolonged engagements, no recoverable firing positions. The assassin's presence is inferred solely through outcome and forensic impossibility. This absence of trace has led certain archivists to refer to Vindicare-related files as studies in controlled disappearance, where causality is reduced to a single irreversible moment followed by administrative closure. In the aggregate, these anomalies and sealed reports reinforce the perception that the Vindicare Temple operates at the boundary between visibility and omission within Imperial record-keeping. Their actions intersect with inquisitorial investigations only long enough to alter conclusions, after which the mechanisms behind those actions recede beyond accessible documentation. The result is a body of evidence defined by precision without attribution, leaving the Inquisition to catalogue effects while the causes remain deliberately obscured. The most restricted inquisitorial materials concerning the Vindicare Temple are contained within classification tiers that limit access even among senior members of the Ordos. These files do not function as operational briefings or historical narratives. Instead, they serve as interpretive frameworks intended to guide how Inquisitors should understand and respond to the presence of Assassinorum sanctioned intervention when it intersects with their own mandates. The tone of these documents is measured, emphasizing caution, acknowledgement of authority, and the necessity of accepting incomplete knowledge. Within these classified writings, the Vindicare Assassin is described as an instrument whose actions are authorized at a level designed to bypass conventional chains of inquiry. Inquisitors are reminded that while their charge grants them vast autonomy, the Officio Assassinorum answers directly to the highest governing structures of the Imperium. Consequently, attempts to obstruct or retroactively investigate Vindicare operations are discouraged unless there exists compelling evidence of misuse. This guidance reflects a pragmatic recognition that institutional overlap must be managed without undermining strategic cohesion. Certain analytical memoranda attempt to contextualize Vindicare methodology within the broader philosophy of Imperial preservation. They argue that the Imperium's scale necessitates forms of intervention that operate faster than judicial or investigative processes can accommodate. Where the Inquisition uncovers corruption through gradual revelation, the Vindicare removes it at the moment when delay would permit escalation. These memoranda do not frame the assassin as a replacement for inquisitorial authority, but as a parallel mechanism activated under different thresholds of urgency. Some speculate within these sealed commentaries that the Vindicare Temple functions as a stabilizing constant across millennia, insulated from political fluctuation precisely so it may act without hesitation. Unlike many imperial bodies that evolve or fragment over time, the Temple's doctrine remains narrowly defined and resistant to reinterpretation. This constancy is viewed by certain inquisitorial scholars as both reassuring and unsettling. It ensures reliability, yet also places significant power within an organization that reveals little of itself. A recurring theme in these files is the concept of informational asymmetry. Inquisitors are accustomed to mastering knowledge as a means of combating heresy, yet Vindicare involvement introduces situations in which outcomes must be accepted without full disclosure. Guidance texts advise that this asymmetry is intentional and structurally necessary. By limiting dissemination of Assassinorum capabilities and intelligence sources, the Imperium prevents adversaries from developing countermeasures. The Inquisition, though formidable, is not exempt from these safeguards. There are also philosophical reflections included among the classified material, written by inquisitors who encountered the aftermath of Vindicare operations repeatedly over their careers. These reflections often describe a gradual shift in perspective. Initial frustration at the loss of investigatory opportunity gives way to recognition that many threats never reach the scale required for formal prosecution because they are excised earlier. The absence of spectacle becomes, in itself, evidence of function. From a doctrinal standpoint, the Inquisition ultimately interprets the Vindicare Temple as an executor of necessity rather than judgment. The assassin does not determine guilt through interrogation or confession. That determination occurs elsewhere, through channels seldom visible. By the time the Vindicare acts, the decision has already been rendered within the Imperium's highest strategic calculus. This separation allows the Inquisition to continue its work of uncovering heresy, while acknowledging that some dangers are addressed through means outside its procedural domain. Final assessments preserved in these archives emphasize coexistence rather than integration. The Inquisition does not seek to absorb or regulate the Vindicare Temple, nor does it deny the value of its existence. Instead, both institutions operate as complementary responses to different manifestations of threat. One investigates, interprets, and judges across time. The other concludes singular matters with irreversible precision when delay would endanger countless lives. In the inquisitorial view, the Vindicare Assassin remains an austere figure defined by absence. Absent from public record, absent from ceremony, absent even from many of the archives that acknowledge their effect. Yet this absence is not interpreted as void, but as deliberate concealment in service to survival. The Imperium endures through many visible instruments of war and faith, but also through these unseen corrections applied without announcement. Thus, the classified perspective does not attempt to fully explain the Vindicare Temple, recognizing that such explanation would contradict the very principles that allow it to function. Instead, it records acceptance. The assassin acts, the threat ceases, the record closes, and the Imperium, often unaware that it was ever in danger, continues forward unchanged.